Lupe Vélez took her own life. It took mere days for word to spread about what had driven her to commit the desperate act. And the truth was chilling. Maria Guadalupe Villalobos Vélez was born in 1908 to a well-off family in Mexico, but her idyllic life was soon shattered by the outbreak of the Mexican Revolution. The family's financial state was deeply impacted by these events and had to pull Lupe out of boarding school. It didn't take her long to bounce back from this, considering she wasn't the biggest fan of boarding school anyway. Lupe had other plans for herself and was determined to get where she wanted to be. After their family moved to Mexico City, hoping to turn their life around, Lupe would work a long shift serving customers at a department store to support the family. But that didn't stop her from also doing what she loved. Vélez would perform in revues across town during the nighttime. At this time, Lupe's father had just come back from the war. You can imagine his reaction to find out his daughter had become a stage performer. He was completely furious, which seemed to have affected Lupe, causing her to change her surname to her mother's, Vélez. Her rebellious attitude led her to become the star she always knew she was, overnight. Well, almost. Despite being a newbie in the Mexican revista scene, she had the attitude and ego of a much bigger star. However, her desire for theatrics did not end just on stage, as she ended up in bitter feuds and petty fights with some of Mexico's most famous performers. You could say she got away with it thanks to her looks, but most importantly, her talent. It made it very easy for her to come back from any scandal. She became a star overnight, which is when Hollywood came calling. At only 17, she was called by matinee idol Richard Bennett, inviting her to be a part of a play in Los Angeles. She excitedly packed her bags with the hopes and dreams of making it to California. But sadly, that wasn't the case, as she was detained at the Mexico-U.S. border for being underage. However, she knew that if one person in Hollywood wanted her, the others would too, so she was determined to stop at nothing. After much negotiation between the Mexican and American governments, Lupe Vélez finally made her way to California. But this time, producers of the play took one look at her and said absolutely not. She was too young to appear opposite the 53-year-old leading man, but this wasn't a problem for everyone. Her youthful look certainly didn't stop Douglas Fairbanks, who was 25 years older than her, from casting her in his film The Gooch Show. That would become the film that changed her life forever. She was now the hot new sensation in Hollywood. From that moment on, many film roles started sparking up for her. Despite being barely an adult, Vélez was not shy about being out and about in the party scene, having affairs with the biggest male stars of the moment, such as Charlie Chaplin, Clark Gable, and Western star Tom Mix, who was a full 28 years older than her, but no one made quite an impact as Gary Cooper did. Lupe Vélez met Gary Cooper on the set of the film Wolf Song, where they fell madly in love. Cooper plays a man who impulsively elopes with Vélez's character, only to leave her for the call of adventure. Eventually, he returns to her, and they live happily ever after, an ironic twist considering everything that went on to happen between the pair. It was Vélez's first real, long-term relationship, and sadly it brought out her dark side, where the state of her mental health began to be questioned. Lupe was very jealous to the point where violence began. She would go at Cooper with a knife, until eventually, on one occasion, her overbearing jealousy led her to actually stab him. Nothing justifies violence, but Vélez's jealousy started to make sense, as Gary had many affairs with different co-stars, such as Marlene Dietrich, and a year later, Carole Lombard. However, it was another one of Gary's relationships that was truly the most scandalous. Cooper felt severe jealousy towards Gary's close friend and occasional roommate, Anderson Lawler. Vélez had revealed to gossip columnist Hedda Hopper that Cooper had an affair with Lawler, but the juiciest part was that Lupe demanded she take part in their affair. If they forgot to include her, she would make a scene. One time at a crowded party, Vélez began to suspect that Cooper had snuck off with Lawler. She made a scene that was so disturbing, it's impossible to forget. According to witnesses, she unzipped his pants in the middle of the party and sniffed for evidence of Lawler's cologne. Yeah, and this was just one example of Vélez's wild antics during her golden years in Hollywood. Despite all of this craziness, Lupe and Gary were madly in love, revealing that the biggest hardship in their relationship was his mother, Alice, who did not approve. For many years, the stress of trying to please the two most female figures in his life led him to decide to leave Lupe after his mother encouraged him to. Their relationship ended there, well, for a little while. But Lupe's public feuds did not. She initiated bitter feuds with basically any old Hollywood star you can imagine. From Greta Garbo to Katharine Hepburn to child star Judy Garland, who was a full 20 years younger than her, to Mexican contemporary Dolores Del Rio. Her weapon of choice was making fun of them through imitations of her rivals, which she'd happily perform in front of everyone at parties. She was now portrayed as the hot-headed, fiery Latina. They gave her a bit of questionable nicknames to match. The Mexican Spitfire is the classic example, but there was also the Mexican Hurricane, the Hot Tamale, and Whoopie Lupe. Two different events occurred around the same time in Hollywood. As the Great Depression was occurring throughout the U.S., Americans increasingly viewed foreigners like Vélez with fear and rejection. Studio execs worried that Vélez's heavy accent would be a problem. But at her court, Vélez was a fighter. She wouldn't let Hollywood get rid of her that easily. From silent films to having actual lines in a movie, Vélez's first all-sound film was Tiger Rose, and luckily for her, she fit the role like a glove. Where other silent stars struggled with talkies, Vélez shined, and the runaway success of Tiger Rose ensured that a slew of new roles came to her. She also doubled her own paycheck by taking on Spanish-language versions of English films she'd appeared in. Vélez was moving up in the world and moving on from Cooper. After Gary broke her heart, she nearly tied the knot with troubled star John Gilbert, but it was just a rebound. Her real Prince Charming was around the corner, but instead of a royal jacket, his uniform either consisted of a swimsuit or a loincloth. In 1932, when Vélez traveled to New York City to make her Broadway debut, she met Tarzan actor and Olympic swimming medalist Johnny Weissmuller. Distance became an obstacle. Vélez and Weissmuller dated on and off for the next year, when she wasn't seeing heartthrob Errol Flynn, that is. However, due to her undeniable chemistry with Johnny, the two ended up getting married in 1933. It all seemed like a fairy tale ending, turned into a horror story. Many of Vélez and Weissmuller's disagreements occurred in public, as they did at home. Whether it was at a dinner party, award show, or sporting event, it didn't matter. They would both bicker, yell, and oftentimes get physical. After 10 months together, Lupe couldn't take it anymore and filed for divorce, stating that the reason be cruelty. That is, until she regretted it 1 week later. They got back together, but their problems didn't stop there. One night, after a fight with Weissmuller, Vélez was so certain she wanted to hit Weissmuller where it hurt. She got on a train to New York and headed off to Europe, where she left him. Over the course of 5 years, she filed for divorce not once or twice, but 3 times. On that last try, it finally stuck. You could say between the public fights and the legal battles, Vélez didn't have an easy first few years of the 1930s, and she was about to suffer another crushing blow. Her studio ended up dropping her. Well, Vélez picked herself up and used her newfound independence to her advantage. She freelanced for a while, and even when her films flopped, critics still tended to praise her performances. Her talent was undeniable. In 1938, Vélez returns to Broadway, where she meets her co-star, Libby Holman. They appear to have some sort of rivalry, as Lupe would tend to with other female stars. But this time, she would take the petty feuds way too far. One night between curtain calls, Vélez lost her temper and punched Holman in the face, giving her a black eye. The show was done, and Broadway was no longer interested in her again. In 1943, Vélez fell for Mexican actor Arturo de Córdoba. But there was just one problem. He was married. Did Vélez care? Absolutely not. In fact, she would even go on to spread lies, telling gossip columnists that they were engaged. Vélez was ready to become a housewife and marry him, but the Córdoba's wife refused to give him a divorce, so he and Vélez broke things off. Regardless, you could say things took a turn for the better, as Lupe starred in a series of 8 comedies that became known as the Spitfire films, which acted as a showcase for her talent and personality. The Spitfire series made history for being the first time that a Hollywood film series starred a non-white actress. They were huge successes, and more hits followed. After that, no man could compare to the impact that Gary had on Lupe, that is, until Harold Raymond came into the picture. He was an Austrian man that told grand stories of fighting Nazis in World War II. However, there was no documentation of his participation in the war. Lupe's friends were skeptical and warned her that he might be using her, but she didn't care. They were together until 1944, where Vélez would go to the doctor and receive some unexpected news. She was pregnant. This turned to her agent for help, and then things just got messier. Raymond said he'd do a fake marriage for Vélez, but she had to sign a contract attesting that she knew the marriage was fake, and only for the baby to have its father's name. No man was going to act like he was doing a favor to Vélez by tying the knot with her. Within a few weeks, she would call a gossip columnist, and not only announce that their engagement was off, but also stated that she never wanted Raymond to work in film ever again. Whatever Lupe wanted, she got. Let's just say her word was highly validated in Hollywood at the time. On the day of her latest film premiere, Lupe Vélez was weighing her options regarding her pregnancy, and seemed very frustrated, giving the most disturbing proposal to her agent, Beau Roos. She said that ending her life could solve the problem, to which Roos made her promise that she wouldn't do anything rash. Sadly, she would end up doing the exact opposite. Vélez went to the premiere of Sasa that night with her 2 co-stars, and afterward, they all went back to her house to celebrate. Lupe wasn't in the mood. She seemed hopeless and exhausted, telling her friends about her situation and how tired she was of fighting for everything. They were worried but confident that she'd never go through with it. So they left her at around 3 a.m. It was the last time they ever saw her. Vélez's secretary found her completely lifeless, laying in bed. She contacted the authorities, and it appeared that she'd voluntarily mixed too many substances. They opened up an investigation until they found a series of notes that Lupe left behind, which would answer some questions. One of the notes was for her secretary, in which she asked for forgiveness. The other note was meant for Harold Raymond, and its contents were truly heartbreaking. The first read to Harold, "May God forgive you and forgive me too, but I prefer to take my life away and our babies before I bring him with shame or end up finishing his life." The second part of the note read, "How could you, Harold, fake such a great love for me and our baby, when all the time you didn't want us? I see no other way out for me, so goodbye and good luck to you. Love, Lupe." After that, several people would speak out following this tragic event. Vélez's friend, Stell Warren, said that because of her religion, Vélez had claimed that she'd rather take her own life than have an abortion. Strangely enough, Lupe's ex-husband, Johnny Weissmuller's son, spoke out about the event. In his memoir, he recounted what his father had told him, which was that Vélez had invited Raymond over that night and only took the pills to either calm her nerves or make a dramatic attempt to scare him. Sadly, it had clearly failed. Author Kenneth Anger told a sensationalized version of the story that sadly became an urban legend. He claimed that Vélez wanted to stage a dramatic scene where her body would be found in bed, but instead her stomach had got the best of her. She said she slipped while on the way to throw up and cracked her head on the toilet, eventually drowning. After this, the speculation started. They believed that Vélez had secretly been meeting with her ex-boyfriend, Gary Cooper, even though he was married and that the baby was his. Either Vélez wanted to cover up for Cooper by tying the knot with Raymond, or Cooper's rejection of her and their child had led to her overdose. There's really no way of knowing. But one thing is for sure, Lupe Vélez deserved better, and her sad and lonely death at 36 is one of Hollywood's greatest tragedies.